Iain Mansfield is Director of Research and Head of Education at Policy Exchange, as well as been a former Special Advisor to the Education Secretary from 2020 to 2022. Iain Mansfield, a very good evening to you. I appreciate your time. Often these things are choreographed, but I'm struck by what I think probably is a coincidence, actually. Today we learned that there'll be more visas made available for people to come to the UK if they are roofers, bricklayers and carpenters. We have a shortage of all those skills, even as the Prime Minister's talking about us as a society overdoing it on a higher education. It feels like a coincidence, but it seems to tell a story too.
I think that's absolutely right. I think if you look over the last 20 years, we've massively expanded the number of people going to university, and we've really not invested in further education and in apprenticeships. And I think if you just look at the basic statistics on those university courses, we have a third of graduates in non-graduate jobs. We have in 1 in 5 university degrees, you'll be worse off or the same off as if you'd never been. And there are courses out there with dropout rates above 50%. That means fewer than half of those who ever start actually go on to finish the course. And yet we've been allowing them to expand uncontrollably at taxpayers' expense. It only makes sense to say if there are courses out there that are not performing, that are not delivering for students, that are leaving them with a mountain of debt, then we should be restricting the number of people who go on those courses.
Ian, I'm reluctant to call some of those institutions bad actors, but it doesn't feel like they're behaving in good faith if they can not turn a blind eye. I mean, clearly they'd rather 50% of people were getting to the, more than 50% were getting to the end of the course, end of the first year. But do they have things in common? And what is driving their behaviour? Because that's bad practice, isn't it, at the very least?
So, yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to look yourself in the mirror very carefully if you are running one of these courses that year after year takes in students and, outputs them with very, very bad outcomes. I think one thing I'd say is that it's a variety of courses. It's not one subject. In fact, some of the worst performing courses are actually in subjects like business studies, which you might think would get you a good job. And indeed, at some universities it does. But at others, it really, really doesn't. So there's a variety of courses. And in fact, there are some universities which have some very good courses and some really, really very badly performing ones. I think the thing is that essentially we don't really have a functioning quality system in higher education. So there is notionally some quality assurance, but every single university has passed for the last sort of 20, 25 years, which obviously isn't in the case in properly regulated areas such as schools, hospitals and so forth. So if you've got that, and maybe if you're struggling a bit financially, it's very easy just to let in some students or to cut the contact hours on a course, just to get the bums on seat and get the money in the door. And it's not really in the best interests of those young people, I must say.
No, nor indeed the taxpayer, who's sometimes on the hook for it as well. I read a very good book a couple of years, 2 years ago, by a Policy Exchange colleague of yours, David Goodhart, best known to people, of course, for his famous Road to Somewhere and the Somewheres and the Anywheres. But this was a very good book, and more in your line, called Head, Heart, Hands, I think it was called. Head, Heart, Hands, that's right. The idea of encouraging people to see the necessity not of sort of knowledge-based skills, but actual mechanical skills, crafts and jobs like that. But he said there's this massive obstacle to get over in terms of status.
I think that's right, but I think a more fundamental thing is that it's not a level playing field in terms of funding or of access. So we cap courses already in further education colleges, but universities, we let them recruit as many as they like. And just to give you a really stark statistic, last year we spent about £23 billion on higher education, only about half of which will ever be paid back. But we only spent £2.8 billion on apprenticeships. That's a huge discrepancy. And if we want apprentices to be a genuine alternative to university, which not just I think, but actually 40% of young people who applied to UCAS last year said that they would consider an apprenticeship, then we do actually need to get a bit of parity there. And the only way to free up that money to invest in apprenticeships and in further education is actually to stop this uncontrolled expansion of low-quality HE courses.
We want our political leaders, we want our prime ministers in particular, to read the road ahead accurately. I just wonder whether, when we look back, and I remember I think it was Southampton University, when I was following the Labour battle bus around in the general election of 2001. And Tony Blair at Southampton University, I think it was the first time he publicly said there is now an aspiration to get 50% of all our young people to university or higher education, because the economy that's coming towards us is a knowledge-based economy, and we have to adapt to survive. Was he right?
No, I think he was very clearly wrong. And actually, if we want to listen to a Blair, I'd rather listen to Iain Blair than Tony Blair, because Iain Blair is the one pushing apprenticeships. But I think we just have to, you have to sort of look at the evidence here. And a third of graduates are in non-graduate jobs. And, this has been pretty stable. So actually, we are training far too many graduates. And as you pointed out right at the beginning, in terms of the shortest occupations in some very practical trades, we're not training anywhere nearly enough of those. And actually, you can make phenomenal money in going it down an apprenticeship route as well, as we all know.
Is there something else going on here as well, which is, well, several other things going on here as well. One is, and I worry about this, that we can create a sort of an ideological monoculture by sending so many people to university, where there is a kind of groupthink in action, I would argue. And the other thing that we lose is young people attaining those landmarks in life at a stage where it's practical so to do, by which I mean, if you've got, and I looked at my own children to some degree to see this happening, if you're a young man or woman and you finish, increasingly there's a sort of arms race, it's not just the undergraduate degree, you've got to get the postgraduate degree, you look at your watch and you're 22 because you've done a bit of I'm 23 because I did a bit of travelling gap year, and then you move around with your job for 2-3 years, and suddenly the klaxon's going because the sort of fertility window is closing, and I'm not even settled down, I don't have my own place. It's pushing away all those barriers, those rites of passage further down the track, and making things that we've taken hitherto for granted, like family formation, just impossible for some younger people.
I think it's absolutely right. And there's a real question on what we gain for this, other than the sort of ever-increasing arms race, and largely at sort of taxpayers' and young people's expense. I mean, if you go back sort of 30 or 40 years, and I've worked with colleagues who went in via these routes, there were a whole host of professions, such as journalism, such as, starting work in a bank, social work, police officers, where there's no expectation to have a degree. You could absolutely leave school, go into them, work your way up, have a great career. Like I say, I've worked with people who've gone into these sorts of professions through those routes. Nowadays, they increasingly are just saying, well, you've got to have a degree, as if a degree somehow made you a better person or a more capable person everywhere. It doesn't. It says you've got a certain set of, academic skills. But actually, in a lot of these professions, we want a much more rounded person than just what can be gained through a degree.
Yeah, and certainly I'll just speak on the topic of journalism, because I think one of the things we lost by insisting on university degrees for journalists was that often connection with a local newspaper, for instance, that somebody had if they left school at 16 or 18 to become an indentured journalist. That's all completely gone. Iain, I'm ranting. I need to end it there, but I really appreciate your time. Thanks ever so much. Iain Mansfield, Director of Research and Head of Education at the think tank Policy Exchange.